Kuching waterfront was built on the very real banks where the city itself was born. It was a place where the institutional buildings from the Brook era were built. Along the river, we can sight the well-preserved courthouse, Fort Margarita, Square Tower, and a few other historical buildings. There were always events being held in the public square where the Square Tower sits. The old courthouse was one of the most attractive buildings in Kuching and was built in 1874. It was the scene of many historical events and sittings of the state legislature. The Dewan Undangan Negeri were held here between 1878 and 1973. The harmonious integration of simplified classical elements adapted to local conditions make this one of the fine architectural examples during the Brook era. The old courthouse was built in 1874, while the clock tower and Charles Brook Monument were constructed in the vicinity in 1883 and 1924. They were the first Brook-era administrative buildings which housed all the government functioning bodies under one roof. Most of the heritage buildings in Kuching are constructed during the Brook era, particularly during Sir Charles Brook era, who was the second Raja during that time. The heritage buildings are clustered alongside the Sarawak River and located near to each other. The existence form a linkage of routes which currently called the Heritage Trail in Kuching. The Kuching Old Courthouse has been restored and adapted for use as a conference and tourist facility, a testament to the interest that the Old Courthouse continues to hold in Sarawak, even though 59 years has passed after the third and also the last Raja, Charles Final Brook, ceded this. Continuous conservational works has been undertaken to retain their historical, cultural and architectural significance to the state. According to the observatory architect Mike Boon, the design is not merely on the building itself but focusing more on the landscape design. The aim is to preserve and not create an architecture that is fighting for attention, as it is located next to a heritage site. An ingenious, honest and powerful form of language coupled with distinct relationship between forms, undulating terrains in its surrounding, as well as adjacent water bodies. There is a sense of serendipity and placemaking in this facility. Built during a period in Southeast Asia history when the Dutch and British colonial system was considered to be at their peak. The architecture of Kuching Old Courthouse forms a stark contrast to the imperial architecture being constructed during that time. The Brook architecture in Sarawak is interesting as it is not generated out of a colonial system and therefore developed in a different way compared to the official colonial architecture of that can be found in India, Indonesia and the rest of Malaysia. Unlike much colonial architecture of that time, they adopted local architecture such as using local material, local construction method, and local workers in their building, particularly the early forts.